Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Chav Zayin 27, and we will be finishing the second parak and beginning the third. And it'd be nice if these prakim were a little bit. I mean, as we mentioned, I think at the first day, the Masechet is very well structured, in that the first parak opens up with Klalim, and then we focus in on Shein and Regel and so on. But once we get to the individual division of the prakim, they're not as a sort of single topic as we would like. So while the second parak dominated the discussions of Shein and Regel, by the end we were dealing with what's a shor muad and what's a shor tam. We sort of started that discussion. We're going to go back to that discussion. We also had the whole issue about about what do you call it, about Adam with the Olam, because I'm sorry, about Karen Bershut Hanizak, right? That Machlokes Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Akiva, when it does a Karen in a private domain, is that going to be half damages or full damages? And now we have Adam with the Olam. So to remind you why we're doing that, that was all an elaboration of the end of the first parak, where it said there are 5 muadim. Remember 5 muadim: Shein and Regel and Karen Bershut Hanizak and Adam, and I missed one. Anyway, so there are those. Oh, and of course, a shur hamuad. So this parak elaborated on those 5 muadim. So it was a dominant discussion of shur muad, but it was also like a little bit of a tease, because it began, the whole discussion of tam and muad and 3 times and reversing it, but it never didn't fully flesh that out. And in a similar way, we are now finishing up the discussion of Adam Muad La'olam, which interestingly also continues into the next parak, and then we'll sort of see what the next parak consists of. Okay, so but just to sort of make you aware that we've dealt with some like major discussions of some of those distinct categories, but we're sort of beginning those discussions to be more fully fleshed out later. And now we're in the middle of the discussion of Adam Muad La'olam. So what the Gemara said is made a very important point at the very beginning. It talked about a person sleeping who accidentally breaks a vessel or blinds somebody else's eye. And the Gemara said this idea of Adam Muad La'olam, that you always pay full regardless of negligence, is only for nezek, is only for damages. But in terms of the additional payment that a person pays in cases of personal injury, like shevet and ripoy and boshet and tsar, all those cases of personal injury, that you would not pay at all times. You would only pay when? What would be the circumstances under which you would pay that? So the Gemara did not fully spell that out. Rashi, to remind you, Rashi at the bottom of Chavav Amud Aleph says, "To lo mechayev arba dvarim el o mezid o karov lemezid dumi dechirvun anashin the hasam ksiv ripoy v'shevet." He discusses the pasuk says when people are fighting, and it talks about so you're fighting, you're intentionally trying to inflict damage. So he says it has to therefore be, you're not more the olam those additional payments, but you don't have to be really fully mitkavein. Rashi's phrase is fully intentional to do damage. He says Rashi's phrase is mezid, intentional, o karov lemezid, close to mezid. So this is what we are now going to sort of like turn to right now to identify what is the threshold under which you would pay those additional payments beyond nezek. And yesterday we looked at some scenarios which would seem to be a good degree of negligence that you would not. Somebody shoots an arrow and he wants it to go a certain distance, and it goes a longer distance and injures somebody. Right? I think that's probably the best example of a degree of negligence. What are you doing shooting an arrow in that person's direction? Okay, and nevertheless, that's not considered negligent enough or karov lemezid enough to pay arba dvarim. People remember that from yesterday? That I think was the most. Another case was you're lying on a rooftop sunning yourself and you have a rock on you, and you knew you had a rock on you and you forgot about it, and then you stood up. Okay, but even that's okay. Well, you're pretty negligent forgetting you have a rock on you when you're sunning out yourself on a rooftop. But even that is like, not as much negligence as shooting an arrow and expecting it to go some distance and it goes a further distance. And nevertheless, it said in that case, you're exempt on the arba dvarim. So let's keep that in mind, because now we're going to try to see the threshold of when you are chayiv in these extra payments for personal injury. Okay, so the Gemara picks up like this. Bashur, 2 lines down on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, right? We read yes? Okay, so Bashur, now these are sort of statements of Rava. Rava had some great statements about throwing a vessel off of a rooftop, and somebody coming and removing the pillows from underneath it. They're both exempt. The guy who threw it was going to land on a pillow. He didn't do anything. The guy who removed the pillow, he was indirect. Or if you threw a pillow, or if you threw a vessel off of a rooftop and it was going to hit the ground and somebody broke it, the second person is exempt because the thing was already about to break. Presumably the first person would be chayav. Okay, and then it started talking about questions about doing that. If God forbid, if we're talking about a baby, a human being, and so on, who is considered to be the murderer? Now, Bashur v'kiblo b'karnav, somebody threw a baby off of a rooftop, and an ox came and gored it in midair. Okay, so pluk said Rabbi Shmuel ben Yoshua ben Brokav Rabbana. Do you have to pay kofar in that case for killing a person? If the ox has scored 3 times, you pay kofar. Would there be a kofar payment in that case? The tiny was on the brisa. In asad pidyon nafsho, that you shall pay the redemption of the soul. This case of kofar, when your ox scores and kills somebody. The main nizak. You pay for the life, as it would be sold in the slave market, of the person whose life was killed, or who was, that's funny, called the nizak, but it means what the main neharav. Maybe Shmuel ben Yoshua ben Broka omer the main mazik. No, the owner of the ox pays for the value of his life, how much he would be sold in the slave market. Because here's the idea: if you're paying an atonement payment, the chiddush of the Torah by an ox that gores somebody is that, as opposed to in the ancient world where the halacha was that if an ox gored somebody, there would be times where actually you would take the life of the owner. By the way, it explains the pasuk, right? The pasuk says, "Oben yigach obat yigach ki mishpat hazeh yeyaseh lo." And everybody knows that when by the ox that gores somebody. So what do you mean if it kills a boy or a girl? It's like, why do I need that pasuk?
It used to be to kill the person.
Of course, that would be the same, because in the ancient world, if it would kill, if Reuven's ox would kill Shimon's children, then they would kill Reuven's children. So if the pasuk is saying, no, you do not take the life of the owner or of the owner's children. What you do is you pay a kofar. Okay, so the kofar, because it's an atonement payment for the loss of the life, how do you make that atonement payment? One way to say is you try to do something that symbolically is giving back the life of the one who was killed. So that would be the value of that person's, the way you would assign a value to human life, of course, which is, absurd. But the only way we can do it is we do it based on how it would go in the slave market. But the other way of understanding it is not giving back the value of the life that was taken, but giving the value of the life of the person who owned the ox, because it's a statement that his life deserves to be taken. And instead of taking his life, you're taking something to substitute for his life. You're taking a monetary payment. Okay, so therefore, if that's so that's the debate. So now we're saying that would tie in here. Why would that tie in here? Because this baby thrown off the roof, it doesn't have any value in the slave market, right? Who's going to pay for a baby that's about to die and as it hits the ground? So if you paid the main nizak, you wouldn't pay anything. But if you paid the main mazik, then you're going to pay however much the value of the owner of the ox. Okay, so in that case, the baby thrown off the roof that the ox scores and kills, whether there would be a payment or not would depend on the main nizak versus the main mazik. Okay, the Amar Rabba. Now Rabba says, now this gets us back to the case of, as I was saying, about what is the threshold of payment for personal injury, for chavala. The Amar Rabba, Nafam Reish Hagag, excuse me, we're not there yet. First, we have to have this fun case. Nafam Reish Hagag v'nitka b'isha. Actually, it is. It's both. Okay, a person falls off of a rooftop and happens to have an erection while he's at the rooftop, and he winds up. What's the word I'm looking for here? Penetrating. Thank you. A woman. Okay, which is like, when you're teaching this in a high school, this is the case that you never forget. Okay, anyway, the kids will never forget this case. Exactly how the Gemara imagined that this could actually happen, I don't know, but anyway. Chayav ba'arba dvarim. Well, we're going to get to that. Chayav ba'arba, but why is it carbonated? We'll see in a minute. Chayav ba'arba dvarim uv'yivim tolokana. So now, finally, after having all those cases where you're exempt for arba dvarim because you are not negligent enough, right? Because even the shooting of the arrow case, here all of a sudden you're chayiv in arba dvarim, but you're not chayiv. But it would not be an act of sex to make this woman your wife, this person's wife, if it was his sister-in-law and the brother had died. I understand. So let's read what the Gemara says. Chayiv b'nezek b'tar b'riboy b'shevet. Now, first of all, you're chayiv in 4 of the 5. Nezek b'tar b'riboy b'shevet. Avo boshes lo, not boshes. Nan, because we're talking the Mishnah. Eino chayiv al boshes ad she'mit kavein. You have to actually have intention. Negligence is enough. Bullshit, you really need intention. We'll see about that in a minute. But by these other things, negligence is enough. Now, we have a double problem understanding what we just taught. Because number one is, why is this more negligent than the case of the shooting of the arrow? right? That's not clear at all. Now you could say that maybe it has to do with the fact that the guy has the erection, because there's a general understanding that, right, that if, I mean, the relevance of that is that, the assumption that an erection has only if the person wants it, like, is interesting because it doesn't really pay attention to a sort of a physiological response to, being sexually stimulated, even if it's not like your desire to have it. But anyway, but the Gemara nevertheless says that, and that's relevant in the following case. Let's say somebody says to someone, kill this person or I'll kill you. Right, so you're supposed to let yourself be killed. But let's say the person didn't do that, and he went ahead and he killed the guy that he was told to kill. Has he committed murder? Is he liable for an act of murder? So the halacha is, the way the Rambam and Tosfos rule is that this guy's not liable for an act of murder. He did the act of murder under duress. So what did he do wrong then? What he did wrong was that he did not fulfill the mitzvah of Yahar Val Yavur, of Kiddush Hashem, of giving up your life before doing that. But the act of murder itself was an act that was done under duress, and he has not violated the act of murder. Now, let's say somebody says to this person, have sex with this married woman or I'll kill you. And he's supposed to give up his life because one of the Yahar Val Yavurs is forbidden act of sex, and he doesn't, and he has sex with that woman. So in that case, he is liable for having done an act of adultery. It's not considered to be under duress and not really his act. Why? Because there's a principle of Ein Kishel L'das. That since erection ultimately comes because a person like this wants to have it, then the source of the desire and the want for the act, when somebody is murdering somebody under duress, the source of the desire for the act is seen to be external to him and being imposed upon him. In this case, the source of the desire for the act is seen to be internal to him. Okay, that's this principle of Ein Kishrei L'das. So you could have sort of said that maybe that somehow explains this case. Since this case is this guy with this erection, so maybe it's considered to be like his act and not an accident, and fundamentally, that he wanted it. Of course, if that's true, and anyway, if that were true, it should be an act of yibum. It should be an act of making his, of sex at his sister-in-law is now his wife. So that doesn't seem to be the way to go. So let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says, "V'nitka b'isha." This is Rashi, 3 lines down to the narrow lines. "V'nitka b'isha chayv barba dvarim." U'chagon, Rashi says, "Shenafel beruach mitzuya dahavile karav lamezid." So Rashi says, no, the only reason here this is considered negligent is because this guy was standing at the edge of the roof, and he should have expected it was very likely that he would fall. So then, why does it not work for the case of yibum? U'b'yivinto lo kana ava b'yushishaninu. Habal Yavinto being Bishogig baby Mezi Kana, that if a man has sex with his sister-in-law, it creates an act of evil, whether it's intentional or not intentional. That's when he wants to have sex. He just thought the woman he was having sex with was a different woman, but it was an intentional act of sex. In this case, he wasn't intending to have an act of sex. Okay, therefore it does not work. So Rashi says that this has nothing. This is not because of this issue of the kishui, of the erection. Basically, this person was all an accident, and that's why, since it was not an intended act of sex, it doesn't work for yibum. So then, why do you pay arba dvarim? So Rashi just says ruach mitzuya. It was a high degree of negligence. Okay, ruach mitzuya, a common wind, it would have been likely to expect. That's a degree of negligence, for example, that a shomer chinam is chayiv. So what you have to do now is you have to go back to everything we talked about yesterday and say that the guy who forgets that he has the rock on his chest, or the guy who shoots an arrow to go 2 feet and goes 4 feet, or 4 feet and goes 8 feet, you have to say, oh, that wasn't negligent enough. Okay, that was a middle degree of negligence. But once you hit high degree of negligence, ruach mitzuya, then that's what you're high for arba dvarim. And that is basically, so it's funny because, you would have thought that would also have been some of those cases yesterday. But that's important principle number one, is that pshia, the type of pshia that a shomer chinam is chayiv for, ruach mitzuya, a common wind, a reasonable thing, a common thing to expect could happen, that type of negligence, that is enough to pay for arba dvarim, for the other payments for personal injury, with the exception of boshet. Boshet needs intention, and now we're going to look at that in a minute.
I'm saying the case of this guy, he's thinking sexual thoughts. He is thinking.
Okay, but that
So
doesn't
why
mean that
wouldn't
he's negligent for the person standing below or whatever.
No, but
Oh, you mean in terms of ego?
Yeah.
But he's not trying to have sex with this woman.
No, he's actually trying to have sex.
Yeah, the act he thought he was doing
Not
was
just
an
thinking.
act of sex.
He's
Correct.
thinking.
Correct. Hello, you had a question?
I just wondering about how this plays in. Now that you mentioned it, how this is not what we discussed in the shows like the bonus that we saw in all that.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Would you have a tchilas of b'pshia b'sofa ba'onus in terms of arba dvarim? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, no, I understand the question. Like, let's say, I mean, since we're going on the Mishnah that says that he's lied down next to a person, right? Simas ein chavero, he's pater, right? And based on the Yerushalmi, whatever Tosfos points out, that's the person came and lied down to. I'm sorry, he's chayiv by simas ein chavero. Yeah, no. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. What do you do? That's some pure self-awareness. I don't know. Okay, I have to think about that. All right. So let's take a look now as the Gemara continues. All right. So now, but Boshet, you have to be meet kaveh. So the Gemara says like this. Ve'amar Rabba, and Rabba says. Now we're going to clarify a little bit about this meet kaveh by Boshet. And here it's where you see where Rashi got Ruach Mitsuya. If the guy fell off with an unexpected wind, unexpected doesn't necessarily mean it's an anus. It could be, but not like it's not blatant negligence, not gross negligence. Okay, but and he damaged somebody below and he caused them to be embarrassed. He's chayv for nezek because nezek is adamur la'olam. Upater barbar dvarim, and he's exempt for the fourth extra payment for personal injury because we said you need pshia, and ruach she'eina mitzuya is not pshia. Upater barbar dvarim. Now ruach mitzuya, and here it's even more explicit where Rashi is getting that as the standard. If it was a wind that could be expected, and he caused personal damage and embarrassed somebody, chay barbar dvarim. You pay four things. So here you see the level, the threshold to be chayiv for the payments of personal injury is ruach mitzuya, which means sort of pshia, type of gross negligence or shomer chinam is chayiv for. Upater ala boshet, but exempt for the boshet, because even with this gross negligence, that is not intentional. And boshet, you're only chayiv if you're intending to actually embarrass or to injure, as we're going at. And then that's the last line. V'nitapei chayiv afala boshet. But if the guy in midair turned around, like he flipped over because he figured, as Rashi explains it, he'd rather fall on somebody below than fall on the concrete. So he intentionally sort of tried to move his position in midair to fall on that person. Then that's going to be considered enough kavanah to be chayiv on boshet. Okay, which is now that's
so the guy gets killed.
Well, maybe
maybe
that's an interesting question. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but or maybe. But the point is, there's a double chiddush here. Number one is you're not intending to injure to embarrass the guy below. You're just trying to break your fall. Not only are you not intending to embarrass the guy below, you're not even trying to hurt him. You don't have any ill will towards that person. But you're just trying to save yourself. But nevertheless, since this act, which is intended to save yourself, is going to come at you know that you are going to injure him or might injure him in the process, that's considered to be intending to injure him. And as we're about to see, if you intend to injure, even if you don't intend to embarrass, that is the level you need to be chai for boshes. The time we talk about the brisa, now the pasuk we learn boshet from is a case where the woman intervenes with her husband and another man fighting, and it says, she grabs him in the genitals or the other man, and it says you cut off her hand. So the rabbis say, don't literally mean you cut off her hand, it means she pays for the embarrassment. So she sends forth her hand. Of course, she therefore grabs the guy. Why does it have to say that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know exactly understand the question. But anyway, she grabs hold of the guy. Since she was trying to damage, even though you were not trying to embarrass, we're just trying to like just trying to to injure the person or to intervene, and not exactly trying to cause embarrassment. Okay, that is enough intention in order to be chayav for boshes. So for boshes, you need not negligence is not enough. You need kavana, but kavanah not to cause embarrassment, kavanah to do damage. And the chiddush of the case of the guy flipping in midair is he might be intending to injure, but he's not motivated to injure the guy. He doesn't want to injure the guy, but he's doing an act that he knows will or might very likely bring about injury. And that also is considered sufficient. So to do an act that you know might very well injure this person, that is considered kavanah lahazik, and that is considered enough to be chayav for bosha. Okay, so those are the thresholds. Nezek is even honest. Shevet ripoit tsar is pshia, the type of pshia of ruach mitzuyah that a shomachim is chayav for. Boshet is kavanah, but not kavanah levayish, kavanah lahazik. And kavanah lahazik is even if you don't want to hurt, you don't want to hurt the person, but you basically are doing an act that you know is going to hurt the person, or might very well.
You don't know
hurt the person.
What?
Yeah. Now, let's say, okay, a lot of funny, Rabbi has a lot of these nice scenarios here, all lined up. Somebody put a coal on another person, like a burning ember on somebody else's heart, like the guy was lying on the floor. Who made? And the person died as a result. Patur. So that's not an act of murder. You're exempt, and maybe also exempt even if for gullers, because the guy should have removed it. I mean, obviously, assuming that the guy had the ability to remove it. Okay. So al bigadov nisraf, it was on a person's garment, and the garment's burnt, chayav. You're chayav. Okay, because you could say, obviously, you burned it. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is, even though the other guy could have removed the coal, what you did the act of damage, you cannot say, well, you did it to yourself because you didn't remove it. No, I can allow it to burn, and I'll just get you to reimburse me. Okay, so Amar Rava, Travayo Taninihi, we taught both of those. Alibo did now, the case of the heart, it's a Mishnah. Kavash alav l'toch ha'ur, if somebody sort of held somebody down in the middle of a fire, l'toch hamayim, or held the person's head underwater, v'inu yachol lalos mishamu meit chayav, and he couldn't get up. So that's an act of murder, even if he didn't push the guy was already in the water. He just put his hand on the guy's head and kept the guy from going up. He didn't even push him underwater. That's considered an act of murder in your chayav. Okay? However, if he pushed the guy into the fire, into the water, even though you did the act of pushing him in, if he's yachol alos mishamu meis patur, if the guy could get out, that's not an act of murder. Okay, so the chiddush is, the first case is a chiddush that's an act of murder, even though you just prevented the guy from getting up. His head was already below water. The second case is a chiddush that it's not an act of murder, even if you push the guy in, since he could get out. So we basically assume that a person will, of course, naturally act in a way to save their own lives, and therefore, if they could have saved their own life and they didn't, then you are exempt, because of course you can't say I did it. The person should have taken, got out of the water. Okay. However, now, so that's that point about the gachelet. So that he says that's from that Mishnah. Now, how do you know by the case of garment that you're chayav? Because we call it the Mishnah. Kares ksusi shiveres kadi chayav. If somebody says rend my garments or break my picture, and you go ahead and you listen to him, fine. He gave you permission to do it, but he didn't say you wouldn't have to reimburse him. So you have to pay him for the garments. You have to pay him for the picture. Amanas liftor patur. But if he says, no, you can break my garment, tear my garments and you won't have to pay me for it, then you're exempt. So what does that tell us? It tells us the following. Why don't you say the same way a person should have removed the coal from his heart, he should have removed the coal that's burning his garment. And if he didn't remove the coal that's burning his garment, so he brought the injury upon himself. Yes, I put the coal on the garment, but don't blame me for it burning. The person will naturally remove something from the garment. So this Mishnah shows us that when it comes to a person's objects as opposed to a person's body, you do not interpret things as if he is okay with the damage and waiving payment. If I tell you tear my garment, tear my clothes, we don't say, oh, you told me I could tear your clothes. It means I won't have to pay. No. It means sometimes I allow my things to be destroyed, but I'm still going to expect you to pay me back for them, okay, unless I explicitly exempt you. And it's not necessarily true that I would naturally remove my coal from the garment. If I knew that I was going to get reimbursed, right, I wouldn't. But it's my own life. It doesn't, of course I'm going to save my own life. But if it's if you're burning my clothes, I figure sometimes people will say steal the car, I need the insurance money. If you're burning my clothes, great, you pay me back. I'll be able to buy myself a new one. So you cannot say that my absence of removing the coal means, oh, I'm okay with the fact that it's destroyed and you're not going to have to pay me. You know, when it's my things, it could be that I let you destroy them with the expectation that it'll get reimbursed, and ultimately you're the one who did it. Yes.
There's a bit of a logical fallacy there, which is that if we assume that someone instinctually does all they can to save their own life, the person died.
Right.
Meaning it was impossible for them to save.
You mean, why don't we just say the fact that they didn't shows us that the person actually was not, was not able to. Right. Yeah. It's a good question. Like, how do you determine what it means was able to? Like, in whose estimation, right?
He didn't.
Yeah.
Don't we assume that he wasn't able to?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you can imagine a case where a person, is sort of is like suicidal or whatever.
Right,
but it's a good question. You're right. Like, I mean, how do we know who gets to determine whether it was possible or not? I mean, but what's one thing I think, if somebody's in the middle of a building in flames, if a guy has a little coal on his heart and he's not doing anything, he's just lying there. But who knows? Maybe he's paralyzed with fear, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
the pain.
right, or whatever. It's a good question. Yeah.
But if we make an exception, if he's trying to save his own life, why don't we interpret flipping over in midair so as not to injure himself, just as an acceptable thing to do?
No. So the question isn't that he did something wrong by the flipping over in the midair. I mean, that's an interesting question, right? Can I intentionally cause injury to somebody else to save my own life? Maybe, there's that's actually a case actually similar to that later on. But even if he did something that was acceptable, it wasn't wrong to do it. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean you don't have to pay the consequences of it and pay the damages. But you're right. That's what I was sort of saying. The intentionality lahazik for boshet does not mean that you want to do an evil act, right? It's just you're doing a conscious act that will cause injury. So that's sufficient. Okay, so now with that distinction, we have one last case by Rabbi. So Rabbi asked, let's say you got your slave, and Tosfos says that the case would be that the slave would be bound. The slave can't do anything about it, because of course, if the slave was not bound, the slave would take the coal off of his own heart. Okay, but the slave can't do anything about it. The question is about you. Okay, somebody went ahead and put a coal on the slave, and the slave is bound and can't do anything, but you can remove it. Gufo dummy. So it's sort of, do you treat the slave like your own self? And of course, you would never tolerate, having letting the slave's life be taken, in this process, and therefore you can't blame the guy who put the coal on the heart, because of course the owner should remove it. The same way the owner would never tolerate it if it was on his own heart. Oh, the mamona dummy. Or is it like on his garment? It's like, okay, you destroy my slave, you'll pay me for a new slave, right? So that's a really interesting question, right? This gets to the whole heart of the issue. Anyway, the heart of the issue of, about a slave as property. How does the owner treat the slave? Does he treat the slave like a piece of property? So you destroy my slave, you'll buy me a new one, and therefore I don't have, it's not expected that I would remove the coal. Or no, the owner recognizes that it's a human being and recognizes the life of the slave, and therefore, of course, he would remove the coal. And if he doesn't, then it's his fault, not your fault. Okay? Now, let's say you say he does treat it like his own body. Shoromahu. Let's say he puts a coal on an ox and a bound ox. Okay, so does the owner say, well, fine, you'll buy me another ox? He treats it like a piece of property, and therefore you're to blame, because there was not an expectation that the owner would remove it, right? Or do you say, no, an ox is still a living thing? If it's a living thing, then you could say, okay, I know I put the coal on the ox, but of course the owner was going to remove it. Who didn't remove it from if their animal's about to be killed? So the Gemara says, Hadar Pashta, so what's the halacha? Hadar Pasha, in the end, he concluded, Avdo Kigufo, Sharo Kamamono. His slave, he treats like his own body, and therefore, it's of course taken for granted that the person would remove a coal from his body, he'd remove a coal from the slave. If he doesn't, he is just welcoming the damage upon himself, and therefore you're exempt. And in the case, though, about the ox, at the end of the day, it might be understood. We wouldn't necessarily expect that he would remove it. Maybe he would be okay with the ox being killed as long as he's going to be reimbursed. So really interesting question, right, about how a person treats things that legally are his property, but there's a difference between inanimate, living things that are his property, and human beings that are his property. And how does he look at them? Does he look at them purely just as, in terms of their dollar value and purely as pieces of property? Yes.
Rashi seems to, I saw that you mentioned Tosfos says that it's katos, but
right.
Rashi doesn't seem that that's the case. So the question is, does the evidence das?
Right, so that's a string, right? But Tosfos' read is a much better read of the Gemara, because what type of a question is it? Of course, a slave would remove something. Yeah, so I was reading it through Tosfos, right? Okay. Okay. So now the Gemara says, so that was an interesting little ending of that. Now we move on to Now we move on to the next parak, which is going to sort of be an interesting intersection of some discussions of Adam Hamazik and Bor. So let's take a look. Somebody puts a vessel in the middle of the public domain, and somebody else comes and trips over it. So Reuven puts a vessel in the middle of Reshut Rabim, and Shimon comes and trips on it. The Shibrani broke it, patur. So Shimon is exempt. Even after, now this is of course in direct contrast with saying a minute ago that Adam Muad Olam. Adam is Muad Olam, but Shimon now walks in Reshut Rabim and breaks Reuven's vessel, he doesn't have to pay. And if, however, Shimon got damaged by breaking the vessel, so Bala Chavit Chayav Benisko, the owner of the barrel has to pay, Reuven has to pay to Shimon, because Reuven made a bore. So you understand, Reuven put his picture or barrel in Reshut Rabim, he made a bore Reshut Rabim, he's Chayav if Shimon gets damaged, but if Shimon damages the thing, Shimon is exempt. So it's on the one hand a bore, we understand why he's Chayav, but we don't understand why Shimon is exempt, because we said Adam Muad La'olam. Okay, so let's take a look at what the Gemara says. So the first thing the Gemara notices is it says you put a picture, and then it ends with talking about the person who put the barrel. And we have similarly where the Mishnah alternates between kad and chavis. Two people are walking in Reshut Rabim, one guy with a beam and the other guy with a barrel. Shows that this guy's picture breaks on this guy's beam. Patur, you're exempt. So patak b'chavit, it starts by describing the case of one guy carrying a barrel, and it ends by the guy carrying the picture. But it's not nami. We taught another Mishnah. This guy's carrying a barrel of wine. The other guy's carrying a picture of honey. So the picture of honey of the barrel. Now we switch to barrel. The barrel of honey cracks, and the honey's about to go to waste. And honey is a lot more expensive, per ounce than wine. So this guy decided he'll do a favor to the other person. He poured out his wine and he saved the honey in his barrel. And now he wants to be reimbursed because I did you a favor. I saved your valuable honey. He only gets paid the fee for the service, for like the act of of saving the honey, like a hired hand, but he does not get paid for his loss of wine. All right, which is, one wonders if that's good public policy. But anyway, that's not our issue right now. What our issue right now is, it initially describes the guy had a picture of honey, and it ends by talking about a barrel of honey. So clearly the Mishnah thinks the word picture and barrel are interchangeable, but they are different things. So Amar of Papa, you're right. In the Mishnah's language, a kad and a chavis refer to the same thing, presumably a chavis, because the other part is always talking about a chavis, a barrel. So why is it sort of interchanging the words? What's an implication of knowing that these can refer to the same things? For case of business, you basically agree with somebody, I'm going to buy a barrel's worth of, a chavis worth of honey, we'll do the honey case, and he goes and he delivers you a pitcher's worth of honey. Okay, so he could say, well, I know you said chavis, but I understood chavis meant a pitcher, or the reverse. You buy a pitcher and what would be the case? You sell a pitcher, whatever. Anyway, you can keep on. You can claim you said one, but you meant the other. So the Gemara says, "Hey, what's the case? If it's a place that's not like whoever like the Mishnah was assuming, a place where it's very clear that barrel means barrel and pitcher means pitcher, halo karala, you can't claim it meant the other thing. It doesn't matter what it says in the Mishnah. In this place, chavis means chavis and kad means kad. So halo karala. So no, here would be the case. The case would be, and presumably if everybody meant the words interchangeably, it also wouldn't be a chiddush, So it must be that the words in general have their standard meaning. A pitcher means a pitcher, and a barrel means a barrel. But some people sometimes use the word chavis to refer to a pitcher, and they use the word kad to refer to a barrel. So I might say that you go by the majority. You don't go by monetary matters after the majority. What does it mean? What principle do you go by monetary matters? So you have the burden of proof. So the case would be, right, you paid me the money for my pitcher, for my chavit of wine. And I delivered to you a pitcher of wine, not a barrel of wine. Okay, so you're saying, what are you talking about? I wanted a barrel. Give me back my money. I didn't want a picture. Say, no. I have the money now in my possession. Okay, you prove that when we agreed to the idea of chavis, we meant barrel. I understood that by chavis, we meant a picture, not a barrel. And if you want to say otherwise, you have to prove it to me. Okay, and the same would be in the reverse. You haven't paid me the money yet, right? We said a card. I delivered a card. And you're saying, no, we said cod, but I wanted a barrel. I assumed we meant a barrel. I said, fine, give me back my money. And I'm saying, no, we agreed to this, pay me. I'm not going to pay you. I say we meant the barrel, not a picture. So whoever you're trying to get to pay up the money, you have to prove that that's what you meant. And even if the majority of times it's clear that, what your interpretation is correct, since there's a minority number of circumstances that people mean the other thing, then you cannot prove, that's not enough to be able to prove that your interpretation is the correct one and that you can force the money out of this other person's hands. Okay, so Hamotzi Mechaver Lavaraya trumps the idea of Rov. Now, what I'm expecting somebody to ask is, well, why don't we just see how much you paid? Like, shouldn't the amount of money that you paid prove what we were talking about? Right? If you paid, if basically a picture normally goes for $10 and a barrel normally goes for $50, and you paid $50, shouldn't that be sufficient proof? The majority possibility maybe isn't, but the amount of money clearly points to what you meant. So Tosfos deals with that. Tosfos says, maybe it would, because there's another Gemara that says it does. But he says there could be scenarios where you can't prove anything from the money, like maybe we didn't settle on the price, and I want, we didn't say, and I want, you're trying to sell me a lot, and I only wanted to buy a little, or vice versa. There could be cases, or let's say we said, I will buy $100 of barrels from you, and you delivered $100 worth of pictures, right? So there could be scenarios in which you can't prove it from money, but it is worth noting that it's possible that the money can be used as evidence. But the simple question of Rove, the majority of what those terms normally meant would not be enough proof to extract money from the other person. Okay, so that's one parenthetical thing which has nothing to do with our focus on Nezek, but it's important, a larger discussion in Shas of Hamotzi Mechaver Lavaraya. Now we get back to our Nezek discussion. Somebody came and was walking in Rishut Rabin and broke the pitcher, they're exempt. Now remember, this is right after having said Adam Ud La'olam. So the Gemara says, Am I potter? Why are you exempt? You should look where you're going. You broke this guy's pitcher, you should look where you're going. So I'm going to be Rav Mishmeit Rav. So in the house of Rav, they said, the basement of Rav, this guy basically filled the street with his barrels. So therefore, there was no way to get through the street without stepping on his barrels. So therefore, I'm exempt because he doesn't have a right to prevent me from walking through Rishus Harabim. Shmuel Amar be'afela shanu. It's night. Since it's night, you can't look where you're going, and that's why you're exempt. Rabbi Yochanan Amar be'keren zavis. It was around the corner. So basically, right? How come this thing's always running? Anyway, basically, it's like, I guess you're putting the barrels here. So this guy is looking where he's going, but, as he sort of turns the corner, you can't see around the corner. So you can't anticipate what you're about to step on as you're turning around the corner. Okay. Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa said, Lo daika masnisin ela okesh molech Reb Yochanan. Our mission can only fit either like Shmuel's read or Reb Yochanan's read, the corner or the darkness. But and that's why you're exempt, because you don't normally can't see where you're going. But the Rav, if it's the case of Rav, that the Rishus Ram is filled with barrels, and you have to, you have no choice but to go through them. Why does it say if you tripped on it, you're exempt? Afilu shiber nami. Even if you intentionally broke the barrel, you're exempt. You don't have a right to stop, to fill up Rishus Harabim. I can intentionally walk through them to get where I have to go. You're compromising my rights of Rishus Harabim. So Amar Rav Zvi Mishmeit Rav, who had the afilu shiber? No, we could read the Mishnah like Rav, that the street was completely blocked with these barrels. And yes, it's true. If you intentionally broke them, you'd also be exempt. The high-tech tiny nitko, so why does it say you tripped? I need to buy Linisty Sefer Vim Huzakba, because we're going to say that if you tripped and got injured, the owner of the barrel has to pay you for damages, that case is dafka nitko, only if it was an accidental tripping. Although shiber, if you intentionally broke the barrel to get through, low, you cannot come to the owner and say, "Oh, I got hurt while I was breaking your barrel trying to get through." Why? My time. Who does it? If you're intentionally breaking it, yes, you have a right to break it, and you don't have to compensate the guy. He had no right to fill the street. But if you are knowing that you're breaking it, then you have to be careful not to hurt yourself if you're consciously breaking it. And if you hurt yourself in that process, don't come to me. But if you tripped on it, then I would have to pay you. Okay? So let's take a moment and pause here for a second. There's two very interesting things that emerge here. Number one is, when you fill Rosh Hashanah, I have a right to intentionally break the stuff to get through. Okay? And we're going to see about that in a minute. That principle, basically, it's like, what do you mean I have a right to break it and get through? Let's say we had a case like this. Your car was across the road. Would I be allowed to go ahead and break your car down and pull it out? No, I'd have to call the cops, right? If there was a problem. So this is going to be an interesting discussion of avi inish linafshe. You might not have a right to do that. You might have to, but why do I have a right to take the law into my own hands and to break it to get through? Why shouldn't we have to call the authorities and force you to remove them, right? So that's an interesting thing, number one, which we're going to get to. The assumption that if you have Rosh Hashanah filled with these things, I can break them in order to get through. Intentionally break them. But the other thing, the more immediate issue is the Gemara's assumption that if I break your barrel, I should pay because I should watch where I'm going. And it gives scenarios that, I'm not expected to watch where I'm going because it's nighttime, it's around the corner or whatever. But the question is, why does any of this make sense? Whatever happened to Adam Olam, right? So who cares? I should watch where I'm going. I shouldn't watch where I'm going. I should be chayiv even in the nighttime. I should be chayiv even around the corner. Why does the Gemara even say, I should watch where I'm going? I shouldn't watch where I'm going. Whatever happened to Adam Olam? So it's very strange that the Gemara seems to accept the idea that I am exempt. It's not bothered with the concept of Adam Olam. And the only question it has, not that I should pay because I should always be liable, but I should pay because I should have watched where I was going, that I had negligence. I should have been paying attention. And it has to give me examples where that's not expected for me to be able to see what I'm doing.
It's basically where we're just arriving. Why is that? So why would be a mu'ah?
So what you're saying is that since the guy who put the barrel did something wrong, that should get me off. And that's probably the best answer. But let's take a look. I wanted to put that out there. I want to read another line, and then I'll tell you what Tosfos and the Ramban say about this. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Gemara says like this. Amalei Rabbi Ava, Katani Beisha Nitka. Okay, Amalei Rabbi Ava Ravashi. Rabbi Ava said to Ravashi, Hachi Amri B'Ma'arav. But here's what they say in Eretz Yisrael. Mishmei Rav Ula, in the name of some say Rabbi Lai, because no, it's just Ula, not Rav Ula. The fee shein darko keveni adam lisponim b'drachim. No. Actually, you don't have to say it's nighttime. You don't have to say it was around the corner. The whole point of the Mishnah to tell you is that people don't look where they're going. Okay? Yeah, people are, constantly they're in their own heads and whatever. And you have to understand that people don't look where they're going, and that's why you're exempt. Having moved in Narda, so there was a case in Narda that somebody broke a barrel in Rosh Hashanah, and it wasn't nighttime, it wasn't around the corner. Okay, the Shmuel, and Shmuel made him pay because he said you should have watched where you should watch where you're going. If it's not one of those special cases. B'Pumpadi said, application was a B'chiyav Rava or a Rabba. And Rabba made him pay. So the Gemara says, I understand why Shmuel made him pay, because Shmuel's going to his explanation. Shmuel says, you're only exempt at nighttime. In the daytime, you should watch where you're going. Ela Rava who exempted him. Maybe he agrees like Shmuel, okay, that basically says that normally in the daytime you would be chayiv. You need a special circumstances like the night, because here he said you were chayiv, so it sounds like that's the normal position. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa, no, karna de atzra have. No. This was a special case where people should know that to look at. Why? It was, Rashi says this is also around the corner, but it's a special case means it was a time when they were pressing the olives. So it was like, and the time when they're pressing the olives, and it's right in front of the olive press, it's very common for people to leave these pictures of olive oil, or I guess the pictures that they're going to be filling with the olive oil, right in the street, right outside the olive press. Okay? The Kiva de Bershuska Avdi, and since it's known that that's what happens, and people have the permission to be leaving their pictures there, in that case, you should watch where you're going. So here the case is, it was a case of a daytime, as opposed to the Mishnah that says you're putter. They would say that in the case of the first position, Shmuel would say, in the case of a daytime, in normal case, you'd be chayiv, you should watch where you're going. And you could say, the other position of Rabbi is, you could say, no. In general, we'll say like they say in Eretz Yisrael. People aren't expected to watch where they're going, and in general, you're putter. Okay? But there's some cases where you are expected to watch where you're going. You know that it's the time of the pressing of the olive oil, and you know that you're getting near the olive press. So, of course, there you have to watch what you're doing. In general, you're not expected to watch where you're going. But in these types of circumstances where people have a permission to be doing this, and you should be aware of this, there you do have to. Okay, so the bottom line, the upshot of all of this is what seems to be exactly against what we said yesterday, right? Which seems to be is a presumption that even as an Adam HaMazik, you're going to be exempt unless you have some degree of fault and some degree of negligence. So either we have to say that you're not expected to watch where you're going, so you have no fault, or you are expected to watch where you're going, and therefore you do have fault, unless it's a special case, like it's the nighttime or it's around the corner or whatever. But basically, the common denominator, whether we assume people are or are not supposed to watch where they're going, or cases where everybody should watch, like it's the time of the pressing of the oil, the common denominator of all of this is that a person is not liable for damage that they do unless there's a certain degree of negligence and a certain degree of fault. And how does that fit with what we said before, that Adam Muad La'olam? So there are two basic answers of the Rishonim in this. Tosfos, which is, I think, the less interesting one, and the Ramban, which is the more interesting one. Tosfos' answer is, well, when we say Adam Muad La'olam, we don't really mean La'olam. Okay, what we really mean is, Tosfos basically has a continuum of degree of negligence. Okay, so you basically have here, which is like full pshia that a shomer chinam would be chayiv for. Okay, that's full negligence, right? Remember the more called that like ruach mitsuya. Okay, and then you have at the other end of the extreme, you have anus, right? Completely act of God, absolutely no negligence. And then in the middle of this continuum, you have Gineva and Aveda. If something gets lost or stolen, right? That a shomer sachar is chayiv for that. That's a middle. Well, okay. Gineva and Aveda. Okay, so that's like a middle degree of negligence. This is full negligence, and this is partial negligence. Partial, because you could have watched it better to prevent it from getting stolen or lost. Okay, so there's a partial negligence in that case, and so there's something you could have done more. Within Gineva and Aveda, of course, Aveda is much closer to the full negligence. Right? Things get lost means you were really being sloppy with them. Okay, getting stolen, somebody else is coming and trying to take it, was much closer to the honest side. All right. So Tosfos says when we say Adam is Muad La'olam, we mean that you're chayav not only in a case of pshia, you're even chayav in the cases of partial negligence that are on this side of pshia. But cases where you have zero, like we have zero negligence, or very minimal negligence, these are cases that you're going to be putter on, and that's the idea of walking in Rosh Hashanah. We would basically say if you're not expected to watch where you're going, then it's considered to be very minimal type of negligence. Okay, so it tells us we're not saying Lord Law, we are not saying all of this. We are actually saying that based on our sugya, what we're actually saying is you need a small degree of negligence to be. You need a small You need a You need a small degree of negligence to be chayav. You need some degree of negligence to be chayav, but if it's only a very small degree, you're actually going to be pater. Now, why Tosfos didn't just say that you're chayav in these cases, is because for example, to say that you don't have to watch where you're going is not really an onus, right? I mean, obviously, there's a certain degree you could be more careful, even if in general people don't watch where they're going or whatever. And there are other sugyas as well that basically lead Tosfos to say you need you're chayav in cases of what do you call it? Partial negligence. But if the negligence is very small, you're going to be pater, and you're not really chayav la'olam. Okay, so that's Tosfos. Tosfos says Adam la'olam doesn't really mean la'olam. Tosfos says Adam la'olam just means that you don't need full negligence to be chayav, but you still need partial negligence. The Ramban's answer is a much more interesting one. The Ramban says, and this is what Hillel was saying. The Ramban said, and I think I've said this before, yes, you are muad la'olam, assuming that there is not contributory negligence. So if I went ahead, the Ramban says, when the Gemara says that if a ruach mitsuya, I remember it's the case of the person is chayav by a ruach she'ena mitsuya, the Ramban says, even if like a whirlwind picked me up and threw me down on your vessels or whatever, and I broke them, I'd be chayav. Adam la'olam, complete honest, I'm chayav. So what's going on in this case of Rishus Harabim that I'm patur if I'm not supposed to watch where I'm going? I'm not supposed to watch where I'm going because you're also negligent. If you know people usually don't watch where they're going, and you're putting your vessels in Rishus Harabim, then you're bringing it upon yourself. So therefore, what? Well, sort of leaf neiver, I guess. But you're. I mean, yes, leaf neiver means I'm making you do like. Okay, but
like,
I don't know if I exactly think it is just to either if I trip and I get hurt. If all I do is I trip and I break your thing, But yeah, but in contributory negligence, when you're bringing it upon yourself, that's what happens here. So in the Rishus Harabim, when I'm choosing to put my vessel down, you'd be chayav even though you have no negligence. But because I know that normally you don't watch where you're going, and I'm going to put it down anyway. I am bringing it by myself. If you normally do watch where you're going, that doesn't make the issue of you watching where you're going isn't that I needed your negligence for you to be chayav. If you watch where you're going, it means that I'm not negligent for putting it down because I could expect that you will see it. So the whole Gemara's discussion about is the guy expected to watch where he's going? Is it the nighttime? Is it around the corner? Whatever is not to determine if the mazik had negligence. We don't need the mazik's negligence. It's to determine if the nizak was negligent in putting it down because he should have realized that it was likely, given the way people act and where the thing was placed, it was likely to get damaged. Yes, Jeff.
I was just going to say it's like laws around reasonable expectation of privacy, that like the same act of eavesdropping or whatever that you would do in someone's private house is illegal for you to do, but if they're in the middle of the street and they're talking about something, then they don't have a reasonable expectation.
That's a nice point. Right, exactly. It's a nice point. Yes.
What about when he intentionally breaks it, even though it's contributory negligence? What about the intention to break it?
So that we're going to get to, but that is if I did something actually, that's going to be taking the law into your own hands when your stuff is in the way.
I mean, didn't we have that?
Yes, so we're going to get to that.
Oh.
But that's when the stuff was in the way and I needed to break it to get through. Okay, but his case was just I didn't need to break it to get through. It was just an accident, right? That would be but we'll see that case. Okay, so that's this is amazing. Like the Gemara says, Adam Olam, and right after saying Adam Olam, and falling off a rooftop with a ruach she'ena mitzuya and all these things, it thinks about but if you don't have to watch where you're going, you should be exempt. So that means tells us to radically redefine Muad Olam and say you need a certain degree of negligence. And Ramban says, no. You are Muad Olam. You fall off a rooftop, a whirlwind pushes you off. You're chayav. I don't care. If the guy though knew that you would have acted in certain ways and he put it in your way, right? Then he's to blame as well, and that's why you're punished. All right. So let's do one more piece of Gemara. Okay. They asked the following question. I'm sorry. Sholi Rav Chizah Rav Nachman. Rav Chizah sent to Rav Nachman. Haray Amru. They said the Rekuva Shalosh. If somebody pushes somebody with his like a leg. Then he it's a boshet. It's an embarrassment worth like 3 zuz. Okay, if he kicks the guy chamisha, he pays 5 zuz. This is like a standard fines that they had for Rashi says for boshet. If people that they assess that was the degree of embarrassment. Ulisam no keret shloshes rei. But if you hit him with like this thing which is basically a saddle, you pay 13. What about if it was like the handle of a hoe or the metal of a hoe? How much would you pay for embarrassment if somebody did that to somebody? So Shalach Lei, he sent back to him, Chizda, Knasa Kamagnis Bavel? Chizda, what are you doing? Are you collecting Knas in Bavel? Boshes is a type of a Knas payment, something we'll discuss later, okay, whether it's Knas or it's like Knas. But anyway, and you don't do it unless you have smicha, unless you have that smicha that goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. You don't do it in Bavel. So, Emali Gufa de Uvda Hechi Habe. Tell me exactly what the story was. Let me get to the bottom of this. So, Shalach Lei, he sent him. The Hu Gargusa, a certain well, the bait tray of a partner owned by partners. To go Yoma Habi Doli Chad Minayu. They would alternate days. Each day, a different person would draw the water. Asachad Kadali Biyoma Delo Delay. One person came and was drawing the water when it wasn't his day. Amalei, so the other guy said, Yom Dibiu, it's my day. The other guy ignored him. Whatever, shut up. And he was drawing water when he wasn't allowed to. Shako Panda Damara, so the guy whose day it was, took the handle of a hoe, Machye, and he hit him, okay, to protect his access to the water on his day. Amalei, so he wanted to know, what should I do to find this guy? He beat this other person who was drawing from the well on the wrong day. So Amalei, so he said back to him, who was it? Who was saying to who? Rav Nachman said to Rav Chisda, let him hit him 100 times with the handle. And good for day, he hit him with the handle. He shouldn't be paying anything. He had a right to hit him with the handle. Even according to the opinion that you're not allowed to take the law into your own hands, but if it's going to be an irrevocable loss, you are allowed to take the law into your own hands. Now, why was it an irrevocable loss? Let him draw the water and then let me sue him to be reimbursed. So Rashi says, well, you don't know. I mean, like, my plants might have died. What's going to happen to my plants today if I can't get them watered? What's going to happen to, maybe the well will run dry after a certain period of time. So my ability, if I really am going to suffer a loss that cannot be recovered in the courts, I'm allowed to take the law into my own hands. But if I can be recovered in the courts, then I am not. Okay, and the reason we are bringing this in here is because that's going to be the case of filling a Rishus Harabim with pictures. Am I allowed to break my way through? Why don't I have to call the cops? Why am I allowed to take the law in my own hands and break my way through? So this introduces what we're going to discuss tomorrow, this very important sugya of basically called vigilantism, but it's taking the law into your own hands to protect the loss of your own property or to protect your own rights. Vigilantism, right, that's like Spider-Man, right? That's like, vigilantism is you're trying to stop other people from doing crimes, whatever, in general in society. Taking the law into your own hands is protecting your own property and your own rights, rather than letting injury happen and then trying to recover it through going to basin and through calling the cops. So that's what we're going to discuss in this context of filling the road with barrels. But again, the key chiddush that we said today about Adam Olam is there's a debate, should you watch where you're going, should you not watch where you're going, and so on. But is that because you are only liable if you're negligent? Or is that because, no, you're liable all the time, whether you're negligent or not, but the issue is whether the other person was negligent. Should they have been aware that they were that by putting their picture there, you were going to trip on it, and therefore they were bringing it upon themselves. Okay, so two very different interpretations of the limits of Adam Olam. Right.